going to go for about 20 minutes, a little bit less now that we've moved into it. A little bit about why I feel qualified to talk to you about this today. My journey to understanding what makes career success has not been an easy one, okay? And here's a couple of tomatoes, and I think one's possibly a psychologist like me, and the other's a client, and one's saying, how can you look at that every day? You know, clearly there's some values misalignment there in that scenario. Apologies to Andy Warhol, the artist who did the painting in the first place. I wasn't always a psychologist. My first job was as a sales representative. My second job was in liquor marketing. My third job was as a hospital technician. And as a sales rep, at the age of 21, I used to get up, put a tie on, jump on a plane, fly to another part of New Zealand, go and see clients, talk to them, stay in a motel, etc., selling products, technical products, interesting products, but selling to these people who knew a lot more about them than I did. I had to wear a tie, and you know what? I hate wearing ties. And in liquor marketing, my second job, I worked for a company called Montana Wines. Some of you will remember it. I developed a product called Miami Cooler. It was New Zealand's first RTD, and it was really sweet. It was about 6% alcohol, and it appealed to teenagers and young women. But encouraging teenagers and young women to drink, something felt really wrong to me. I couldn't give it my best. There was something missing. With both of those jobs, there was a disconnect between my values and what was expected of me in the workplace. And so I really struggled to thrive in my career, in my early career. Since then, and since becoming a psychologist, I've learned a lot more about why people succeed at work. I've recruited a lot of people. In fact, I've had a recruitment business. I've given many people career advice, and I do a lot of career coaching, particularly for senior executives. And I get paid very well for that work. And my work for Ignite, I also help people with everyday work issues and career issues. So I'm now in my dream job, but that's taken me 40 years of hard-won learning and more than a few mistakes. And over those 40 years, I've developed my self-awareness. And I guess that's my credentials for being here today and sharing what I see as the top tips for career success. So let's have a look at the first one in a little bit more detail. I said the first key ingredient to career success was psychological safety. So what do I mean by psychological safety? Well, psychological safety is a shared belief that the team that you're in is safe, is a safe place for interpersonal risk-taking. And team members are not afraid of being ignored. They're not afraid of being laughed at. They're not afraid of being punished for speaking out. And there's no tolerance, zero tolerance for bullying. So that is psychological safety. If you have that at work, you have psychological safety. So why is that an essential ingredient, the first essential ingredient for career success? Well, if you're punished for taking risks, you're not going to take them. And unless you're an airline pilot, you have to take risks in order to succeed. If you have something to contribute and you're repeatedly ignored or you're ridiculed for contributing, you're going to stop contributing. If you're afraid of being punished or bullied, you're going to make yourself as small as possible at work to present a smaller target. So here's my question. Under those conditions, are you going to do your best work and advance in your career? No, you're not. You're not going to. I'm just going to stop the slide for a moment. You know, think of a child. If a child is growing up in an unsafe environment and they're punished just for being who they are, they're going to find it harder to thrive into adulthood. But if you grow up in a safe, supportive and caring environment, like you hope for most children or all children, then you're going to have a good chance of thriving and growing into adulthood. It's the same with our careers, growing our careers. If you're not safe at work, your focus narrows and you start to think about survival, job survival. You become less aware of opportunities and more likely to see threats and miss out on the opportunities. So, first lesson, if you're not in the right place, you need to get to psychological safety, okay? How can we be more psychologically safe at work if that's an essential ingredient for our success? Well, as an employee, we can help cultivate that climate of safety with our colleagues. And we can start to do that by being open and honest with those around us. And that needs to be done in the context of relationships, okay? So you need to think about the relationships that you're in and then say, well, can I bring a little bit more openness to this relationship? At all costs, avoid blaming other people. A blaming culture is not a psychologically safe environment for you or for the people that you're blaming, okay? It doesn't mean that you can't hold people accountable. That's part of honesty. But there's a big difference. Think if you needed a report, some numbers for a report in the course of your work, and people are very slow in giving you those numbers. There's a big difference in saying, you are bloody useless and you're holding me back. You know, you're useless at your job. You're a waste of space. There's a big difference between that. Your department's just, you know, always the problem. There's a big difference between saying that and saying, when your finance team didn't give me the numbers I needed, I was unable to get my report in on time. And that, you know, I was really annoyed with that. So the first one is blaming. The second one is simply saying honestly how you feel and holding others accountable. The third ingredient to making that psychologically safe workplace is to be open to feedback. So if you're going to be honest, you've got to expect other people to be honest with you and welcome it when they're honest with you, because it might be that there is stuff that they see that you can't see. So this is where you have to welcome people's, directness. And then lastly, be inclusive. So another way you can make a psychologically safe workplace is to keep everyone informed and not just give information to some people and not others. Not just include some people, but not others. Don't just include the people you like. Be even-handed with everybody and make sure everybody has equal access to information. I've seen this a lot in problem workplaces where people use information as a way of excluding other people. Oh, yeah, you didn't know that? Oh, well, that's your problem. You know, tell everybody. Be really open and transparent, and that's how you can help promote, as an employer, a psychologically safe workplace. As an employer, I strongly recommend, if you're employing other people and you don't know how to make a psychologically safe workplace, go to our workshop, Building a Well Workplace, which you can book that via the Ignite platform, or any workshop on psychological safety in the workplace. So that's psychological safety. What is the next key ingredient for career success? Well, it's being your true self. I guess you guys know who this is, a very famous fellow by the name of Steve Jobs. He started a company you might have heard of called Apple. I think they make phones and things like that. But here's the thing. He wasn't always successful. And in some ways, he wasn't necessarily always a very likable character. He did have a lot of conflict with a few people, but he certainly was authentic. He was himself. And he said this at a graduation ceremony: your time is limited, so don't waste it by living somebody else's life. Okay? Most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. And this was his key ingredient. He was true to himself. He would basically be very dogmatic about how he wanted his phones and his user interfaces to look, because that was what he was passionate about. That was his values. So when I talk about being true to yourself, I'm talking about authenticity. And authenticity is that alignment between your internal sense of self and your outward behavior. But in order to be able to do that, you need to feel safe, okay? And that's where psychological safety comes in. So you can't be authentic unless you've got that environment where you're safe to be authentic. But what happens when you are authentic, like Steve Jobs? Well, you increase your work satisfaction, you increase your engagement with your job, you get more energy and focus, you become more committed to the organization you're working for. And that's power. So what happens is you get more power and you start to do better work. Of course you do. Of course you do better work, because you haven't got this negative energy of trying to be someone or something that you're not. Faking it decreases your power. Being authentic increases your power, and people can see that. A light shines out of you. Okay? So what gets in our way of being authentic every single day? Well, I'll tell you what gets in the way. It's because we don't feel safe. So it comes back to being in team environment or an organizational environment where we are feeling safe to be ourselves, be our true selves. Okay? So what's the third key ingredient? I'm going to share the screen again. Third key ingredient for career success are your values. Okay? Your values, not other people's values, not the organization's values, but your values. And hopefully there's some kind of alignment between the organization's values and the values you need to live in order to do a good job, and your own personal values. What do I mean by values? Well, they include things like this. What do you stand for politically? Are you about distributing wealth to people who don't have it, or are you about individual success? Where do you sit on that political spectrum? Do you believe in a God? And if you believe in a God, what sort of God? Is that a loving God? Is it the sort of God that punishes people if they make mistakes? Answers to those sorts of questions indicate your values. What cultures do you identify, and what values do those cultures stand for? Here's a value. Is work a means to an end, or is it just something that you do because it's absolutely who you are? So do you live for the weekends, or is your job really, really important to you? That's a value. Where you sit on that says something about your values. What are your gender politics? How important are gender politics to you? Is keeping physically active part of how you keep well? That could be a core value for you. Would you choose to tell a lie to make someone feel better? That could be a value, because somebody else could say, absolutely not. Lying is a sin. So there are all these things that would define what your values are. What happens when we don't live our values? Okay, what happens when we don't live our values? When you don't live your values at work, some of the symptoms can be things like disengagement. You start fantasizing about shifting jobs. You start thinking about how dissatisfied you are with your current job. You might get mildly depressed or have depressive thoughts, and you might feel tired at the thought of work and never quite get over it at the weekend. So some of those things can be signs that your values are out of alignment, or that you're not able to live your values at work. In that situation, what can you do? Well, the three key things to living your values and being authentic at work is being relational at the same time. So don't just put your values out there and then expect everybody to go, woohoo, wow, that's really authentic. Let's give them a promotion. Think, is what I'm disclosing or what I'm choosing to show as my values, is that appropriate for this relationship? I'll give you an example. I started a job once in a government department, and on day one, I was standing in reception, and this guy came up to me. He was wearing a tie and a suit, and he was, but his hair was a bit disheveled, and he came straight up to me and he put his hand out and he said, "Hi, I'm such and such. I won't give you his name. I've been in Ward 10. Now, I don't know if any of you remember, but Ward 10 used to be the inpatient psychiatric ward at Auckland Hospital a long time ago. And this was the first thing he said to me. And so he was disclosing some lived experience of mental illness, which was great, good on him. But the only thing was that was the first thing that he said to me. And so it coloured my impression of him for the next 3 months. And I wasn't able to see past that, to see that he was a witty, funny, highly intelligent, very dedicated to his clients person, because he was disclosing. And it was like, he didn't have a relationship with me. So if you're going to be authentic, and I'm saying don't hide the fact that if you've got lived experience of mental illness, go for it. But think about the timing, the context of the relationship. And I'm just using that as one example. It can be anything that you're choosing to disclose, not just lived experience of mental illness. Second is being courageous. It's going to take some courage to be authentic and honest, particularly if nobody's ever gone that way before. So what, for example, might it be like if you were the first person to come out as non-binary at work and there's no role models around you? So you need to think about, if you're going to be that courageous, where is your support? Where are you going to get your support from? Okay. And then the third key ingredient is be prepared to compromise. If something's important to you, it might not be important to other people or the rest of the organization. And you might have to navigate forward with care and commitment and compromise. I'll give you an example. If your faith tells you that something is a sin, but your employer aims to include people with a very different perspective on that, there's got to be some sort of compromise if you're going to live with those values, both the values of the organization and your own values around what that your faith and what your faith is telling you. So being authentic, being in relation and thinking about the relationships and as the context of the authenticity and the importance of maintaining those relationships, being courageous and where you're going to get your support from, and then being prepared to compromise about some things. There may be some things that you're not prepared to compromise about. Are the three key ingredients of career success. Now, I talked about the secret sauce that brings these three things together, and that is relationships. So we do need to be thinking very carefully when we're being authentic, how that plays out in the relationships. And relationships are important. Workplace is a very important place for us to get our social interaction. And so we need to be mindful of preserving those relationships. It doesn't mean you have to like everybody at work. It doesn't even mean that you need to be best buds with everyone at work or even one person at work. You can go home and you can have friendships outside of work, but you do need to be in relationship with people at work. So when you're thinking about these three things, psychological safety, being true to yourself, and living your values, think about it in the context of how am I going to stay in relationship with my colleagues. So that's pretty much it from me. So I'm going to share one last slide, which is this, the secret sauce. We talked about that. And thank you very much for listening.